Vegas looked bad. Like, really, really bad. In a tournament participating with three contenders teams, they were the only one to go 0-4. They won one map against London, who were trolling them, and looked awful in just about every other series they were in. I'm sorry, Vegas fans, this one looks rough. If you keep playing like this, you may just be the second team in Overwatch history to lose more than 40 games in a row. Trick Room entered with a hell of a narrative, beating Shock with a team of almost nobodies, in the Owl community at least. But then they started to slow down real quickly in a very stacked group. Florida and Vancouver both handled them pretty solidly, and Timeless didn't sweat too much either. Still, a great performance from them, but their speed seems to have been used against them. I think most people came into the Pro-Am thinking Valiant would go winless. Luckily for them, they beat Vegas very handily. Not only that, but they took a map off Saints. They're looking pretty good already. I think they'll only get better from here. Timeless started off very, very weak. Kaffa and Wub really did step it up towards the end. Nobody necessarily played bad, but they were in a pretty tough group. Saints had a pretty rough loss to London, who really gave them the business. An even tougher loss to Atlanta, who just outmuscled them. But I think that the biggest problem was that CJ left at a pretty key time, and they didn't have a ton of scrims either to work with Squid. I think if they did have CJ or they had more time to scrim, I do think they would have managed to beat London and get second in this group, but as it stands, Saints were just about average. Titans had a very good match against Trick Room, a good match against Timeless, a rough match against Florida, and a pretty bad blowout loss to the Shock. They do look better than I think most people expected, but I'm most intrigued by this team, I think. Sugar Free really impressed, but Faith did look quite poor. An upgrade may be in order here. Kelix and Slay both look pretty decent in contenders. There's some other options as well, like Opener. Look around, see what you can find. London gave everyone a pretty bad scare in that Vegas match, but when they weren't trolling, they handled everything pretty well. They did lose to Atlanta, but I think that's expected, and outside of that, they looked really good. Sparker is still a contestant for the best Western hit scan. I call him the best by far, and the backline looks good as ever. I do think Hottie is slowing down a little bit though, just enough to notice if you look into it. Atlanta absolutely dominated their group, not even dropping a single map. But I don't think there was anyone really to resist them here. Put them against Florida or Shock, and I think their hole at coaching becomes more noticeable to the average fan. Still, though, they do have some of the best players in the entire league, so they're probably going to be alright. Shock started off pretty poor against Florida, and even worse against Trick Room, but once they lost that match, they really started to step it up and managed two straight 2-0 wins. They're getting better and better every day, and if it weren't for them being in the same half of the bracket as Atlanta, they'd probably win it all. Florida looked unreal this weekend. They did drop one map to Shock, but never dropped a bead of sweat afterwards. Someone looked like an early MVP candidate. Gunba and McGravy are putting in the hours, and Merritt proved his flexibility onto the Cassidy and Sombra really well this weekend. Chorong and RuPaul have been filling their jobs decently well, and Sana looked alright for his first map. But the real highlight for me was Checkmate. His positioning, timing, and mechanics were probably the best of any Tracer in the tournament. If Florida take it all the way, it'll be off of him, I think. Although I do think RuPaul is probably the weakest link on this team, even though he's probably the third best flex support we saw. I think if Florida lose, it'll probably be because of a combination of RuPaul and overconfidence, but it's really only going to be Atlanta who I think stop them.